Adrian hadn't even been looking. He'd been walking past when the panhead's knock caught his ear, a sick metallic scream that stopped him dead.
The hell you looking at, welfare boy?
Your engine, sir. I can fix that. 3 minutes. Free.
Earl laughed first, then the crowd.
14 mechanics, $4.5 million.
Earl shoved him back.
And some gutter rat in busted sneakers thinks he's got the answer?
Please, just let me listen to it.
Touch that bike and I'll break your fingers.
Vince chewed his cigar, eyes on the kid's hands, oil black knuckles, old scars.
Let him. Vince, this kid... I said let him. We've burned $4 million on worst. But boy, you make it worse, you don't leave.
Adrian nodded, closed his eyes. What those 3 minutes did, no amount of money could undo. The engine coughed like something trapped inside was trying to die but couldn't. A deep metallic knock, steady, relentless, pounded through the Arizona garage like a fist hitting a coffin lid from the inside. Then a high-pitched whine sliced through thin and sharp, the kind of sound that made 20-year mechanics wince and look the other way. Oil wept from gaskets that had been replaced 3 times. The exhaust coughed black smoke in uneven bursts, choking the desert air with the stink of burning legacy. This was the 1948 Panhead Harley-Davidson, crown jewel of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club Arizona chapter, a machine that had thundered across Route 66 when Eisenhower was still in office, a machine that bar fights started over, funerals were led by, and brotherhood was sworn on. Its original owner rode it from Tucson to Sturgis 11 times without a single breakdown. 4 generations of scarred hands had polished that chrome. Now it sat on a hydraulic lift, shaking like a sick animal refusing to run clean for more than 40 seconds. The Hells Angels had spent $4.5 million trying to fix it. Not a typo. $4.5 million. Over 24 months, 14 mechanics had walked into that garage carrying toolboxes and confidence. Every single one walked out carrying excuses. The first lasted 6 weeks. Replaced the entire valve train, push rods, lifters, rocker arms. $62,000. The knock stayed. The second stripped the top end, rebuilt the heads, lapped every valve seat by hand. $89,000. The knock laughed at him. Number 5 shipped the whole engine to a vintage restoration shop in Milwaukee. They kept it 4 months, tore it down to the bare cases, inspected every bearing surface under magnification, reassembled with new old stock parts sourced from 3 countries. $214,000, including a mahogany crate lined with velvet for shipping. The knock was waiting when the engine came home. By mechanic number 10, the chapter president had stopped counting invoices. He just watched his accountant's face turn a shade grayer each quarter. By 12, rumors crawled through the biker world that the Panhead was cursed. Some old-timer at a bar in Flagstaff swore a medicine man hexed it in 1971. Nobody laughed at that story anymore. A prospect suggested selling it once. He wasn't a prospect much longer. Then came Earl Stanton. Earl was supposed to be the final answer, a SE master technician. 23 years in the trade, a shop in Scottsdale so clean you could eat off the floors, $500 an hour, 6-month waiting list, walls plastered with framed certificates and photos of him shaking hands with NASCAR engine builders. Earl spent 6 months on the Panhead, swapped the camshaft, rebuilt the carburetor from scratch twice, tore the primary chain assembly apart link by link, replaced the entire drive system. $380,000 in parts and labor. The knock didn't flinch. On his last day, Earl stood in the clubhouse. Sweat darkened the collar of his navy shirt, the one with Earl stitched neat above the pocket. He slid his Oakley sunglasses off, polished them slow on his sleeve, and delivered his verdict to a room full of men who could fold him in half without standing up. This engine is dead. You're burning cash on a ghost. Vince Iron Jaw Caldwell sat at the head of the table. 286 pounds, sun-scorched skin, prison ink crawling up both arms. His leather cut sagged under patches, the 1% diamond, the death head, the Arizona bottom rocker. A dead cigar sat clenched in his teeth, the filter chewed flat. His knuckles were scarred white from decades of conversations that never involved words. "Get out," Vince said. Earl got out. That night, Vince sat alone in the garage. The fluorescent tube buzzed above, throwing sick yellow light across the panhead's chrome. The bike sat still, silent. Its reflection showed a warped version of a man who had never in his life met a problem that money or violence couldn't solve. He ran his palm across the gas tank. Cold steel. No pulse. $4.5 million, 24 months, 14 experts. And somewhere on the south side of Chicago, a 19-year-old kid in a stained white t-shirt was tightening a lawnmower blade for a neighbor who'd pay him with a plate of rice and beans. He hadn't heard about the panhead yet, but he would. Harold's garage sat on the corner of 63rd and Low like a rotten tooth the block refused to pull. The sign hung crooked from one chain, paint peeling, letters fading. The H had fallen off 6 years ago and nobody fixed it. Inside, the floor was stained so deep with motor oil that the concrete had turned black and would stay that way forever. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling on a wire that probably violated 9 fire codes. The walls were lined with pegboards holding wrenches, sockets, screwdrivers, all organized by size. Every outline traced in white chalk so you'd know if one was missing. This was where Adrian Fletcher learned everything he knew. His grandfather Harold built the garage in 1974 with scrap lumber and a bank loan nobody expected him to pay back. He paid it back. Took 11 years, but he paid every cent. The neighborhood knew him as the man who could fix anything: lawnmowers, generators, truck engines, church van transmissions, the school bus that broke down every February. He never advertised, never needed to. Word of mouth on the south side traveled faster than any billboard. Adrian started coming to the garage at 5. By 7, Harold had him holding flashlights and handing tools. Not because the boy asked, because the boy wouldn't leave. "Engine don't lie, boy," Harold used to say, his voice like gravel rolling downhill. "People lie. Mechanics lie. But an engine, it tells you exactly what's wrong. You just gotta listen." Adrian listened. By 9, he could tell the difference between a rod knock and a wrist pin tick with his eyes closed. By 12, he was rebuilding carburetors alone while Harold sat in the folding chair by the door, sipping coffee from a thermos that had lost its cap years ago, nodding slow when the boy got it right, which was almost always. The gift wasn't in his hands. It was in his ears. Adrian heard engines the way some people heard music. A misfire wasn't just a misfire. It had pitch, rhythm, texture. A bad bearing sang differently than a worn cam lobe. A cracked gasket whispered while a failing valve train screamed. He didn't need a diagnostic computer. He didn't need a manual. He needed 30 seconds and silence. Harold died when Adrian was 16. Heart attack. Right there on the garage floor between a 97 Civic and a riding mower with a seized blade. Adrian found him, called 911, sat next to him on the oil-stained concrete and held his hand until the ambulance came. The paramedics said he'd been gone before he hit the ground. The garage went dark for 3 months. Adrian's mother worked double shifts at a nursing home on the west side. His father had been gone since Adrian was 4. No forwarding address, no birthday cards, no story worth telling. There was no money for college, no money for trade school. Some months there was barely money for the electric bill. Adrian reopened the garage at 16 and a half. Didn't change the name, didn't fix the sign, didn't replace the fallen H. He just unlocked the door one Tuesday morning, turned on that one dangling bulb, and waited. Mrs. Patterson from down the block brought her Buick in that same afternoon. Alternator wine. Adrian fixed it in 40 minutes. She paid him with a casserole dish and $12 in loose change. That was the business model. Fix what people brought. Charge what they could afford. Sometimes that was $50. Sometimes that was a plate of food. Sometimes it was nothing at all, and Adrian would just nod and say, "Next time." He never turned anyone away. By 19, Adrian had fixed more engines than most certified mechanics twice his age. He'd never held a certification, never applied for one, never saw the point. The engines didn't ask for paperwork. They just needed someone who could hear what was wrong. He wore the same clothes most days, faded white tee yellowed at the collar, brown cargo pants with the right pocket bulging from the stubby wrench set he carried everywhere. Air Force Ones with a cracked sole. And always the John Deere cap turned backwards, Harold's cap. The brim bent and warped from years of sweat. The only thing his grandfather left him that still fit. The cap and the ears. That was all Adrian Fletcher had. It was enough. The first mechanic showed up in January with a diesel-stained resume and a handshake that could crack walnuts. His name was Gene Whitmore, 30 years in Harley restoration. Flew in from Memphis with a crate of specialty tools and a promised 6 weeks tops. He spent 4 of those weeks just disassembling the top-end push rods, lifters, rocker arms, valve springs. Replaced every piece with machined reproductions from a shop in Germany that only took orders by fax. $62,000. Gene buttoned it up on a Thursday, hit the starter, and the knock came back before the engine finished its first full revolution. Gene stared at the bike for 11 minutes without speaking. Then he packed his tools and caught a flight home. He never returned the Hells Angels calls. The second mechanic blamed Gene. Of course he did. His name was Dale Prescott out of Albuquerque. Dale said Gene had lapped the valve seats wrong. So Dale stripped the heads, relapped every seat by hand with 3 grades of compound, replaced the guides, and shimmed the springs to factory spec. $89,000. The knock stayed. Dale blamed the cases. Number 3 blamed the crank. Number 4 blamed the oil pump. Number 5, a full restoration house in Milwaukee called Heritage Iron, blamed everyone who came before. They crated the engine in mahogany lined with velvet, shipped it north, and kept it 4 months. Tore it down to bare cases. Inspected every journal, every bearing surface, every thread under magnification. Sourced new old stock parts from England, Japan, and a barn in Iowa where a dead farmer's widow didn't know what she was sitting on. $214,000. The knock was there on the first start, like it had been waiting. By mechanic number 7, the bills had crossed $2 million. Vince Ironjaw Caldwell stopped reading the invoices. He'd just look at the total grunt and sign. His sergeant-at-arms, Big Ray Thompson, 6'5", 310 pounds, bald head gleaming like a cannonball, would stand behind him and say nothing. Big Ray never said much, but the way his jaw tightened each time a new mechanic failed told you everything. Number 8 was a professor. Actual Ph.D. in mechanical engineering from Arizona State. He brought an oscilloscope, a spectral analyzer, and 2 graduate students. They recorded the engine's acoustic signature at 47 different RPM points, published a paper about it, charged $112,000 in consulting fees. The knock didn't read academic journals. Number 9 was a psychic. Vince's ex-wife's idea. Cost $400 and a crystal that was supposed to absorb negative energy from the crankcase. The crystal cracked on day 2. Nobody talked about number 9. Numbers 10 through 13 blurred together. A retired Indian motorcycle engineer, a custom builder from Orange County who'd been on a reality TV show, a German specialist who flew in from Stuttgart and communicated only through a translator, a kid from YouTube with 3 million subscribers and a sponsorship deal with a tool company. Each one confident on arrival, each one quiet on departure. Total damage by month, $24.2 million. The Panhead had become the most expensive repair failure in the history of the American motorcycle community. Forums debated it. Podcasts covered it. Rival clubs made jokes about it in bars from San Diego to Boston. Then, Vince made one last call. Earl Stanton. Earl didn't just walk into the Arizona clubhouse. He drove in matte black Ford F350 custom plates reading, "Fixed It." He wore his navy shirt pressed stiff with Earl stitched above the pocket in cursive. Oakley sunglasses pushed up on styled salt and pepper hair. Tag Heuer on his left wrist. Boots that had never touched a puddle of oil. His shop in Scottsdale charged $500 an hour. The waiting list ran 6 months. Every wall was covered in framed ASE certifications and photographs of Earl shaking hands with people who built engines for Hendrick Motorsports. Earl spent 6 months with the Panhead. He was methodical, thorough, expensive. Replaced the camshaft with a precision-ground reproduction. Rebuilt the S&S carburetor twice. Tore the primary chain assembly apart. Inspected every roller, every link, every bushing. Replaced the entire drive system. $380,000. The knock persisted. Unchanged. Unmoved. Almost mocking. Earl stood in the clubhouse on his last day, sweat creeping down the collar of that navy shirt. He looked at Vince. He looked at Big Ray standing behind Vince like a wall of silence. "This engine is dead," Earl said. "You're burning cash on a ghost." Vince's cigar hadn't been lit in 3 hours. The filter was chewed to pulp. "Get out." Earl got out, but he didn't go far. He'd be at Sturgis in 3 weeks, and so would someone else. Sturgis, South Dakota. First week of August. 500,000 bikers packed into a town built for 7,000. The air tasted like exhaust and sunscreen. Main Street was a crawling river of chrome. Harleys, Indians, custom choppers with ape hangers and suicide shifts. The rumble never stopped. Not at noon, not at midnight. It was the kind of bass that settled into your ribs and stayed there like a second heartbeat. Vendors sold leather under white tents. Tattoo needles buzzed in pop-up parlors. Somewhere behind the Iron Horse Saloon, a cover band murdered Born to Be Wild for the 900th time that week. Adrian Fletcher rode in on a 1972 Honda CB350. Among the sea of 1,000-pound American iron, his bike looked like a bicycle with an engine bolted on. The paint was primer gray where it wasn't rust. The exhaust pipe was wrapped in header tape that had started unraveling somewhere around Sioux Falls. The seat foam poked through cracked vinyl. He'd bought it for $300 from a man in Gary, Indiana, who said the clutch was mostly fine. The clutch was not mostly fine. Adrian had rebuilt it in a rest stop parking lot outside of Rapid City using a flathead screwdriver and a paperclip. He didn't come to Sturgis to show off. He came because Harold used to talk about it. Every August, the old man would lean back in his folding chair, thermos in hand, and tell stories about the year he rode out in '88. The crowd, the noise, the feeling of being surrounded by 100,000 engines all breathing at once. Harold never went back, couldn't afford to, but he talked about it like church. Adrian had saved 11 months for gas money, slept in a tent he borrowed from Mrs. Patterson's son, ate peanut butter from the jar. This was his pilgrimage. He spent the first 2 days just walking, listening. Every engine that passed was a voice, and Adrian's ears cataloged them automatically. Healthy, sick, dying, dead. A street glide with a compensator knock. A Sportster running lean. A Road King with a primary chain so loose it sounded like a bag of wrenches rolling downhill. He heard them all. Fixed none. He wasn't here for work. Then on the third morning, he heard something different. He was cutting through the back lot behind the main vendor row, helmet dangling from one hand, when a sound reached him that made him stop mid-step. A deep, arrhythmic knock, but layered underneath it, a faint metallic ticking that rose and fell with RPM changes. Most people would hear one sound. Adrian heard two, and the second one was the one that mattered. He turned his head. 60 yards away, past a row of trailers flying Hell's Angels flags, a cluster of men in leather cuts stood around a bike on a portable lift. One of them cranked the throttle. The engine barked, knocked, wheezed. Another crank, same result. The men shook their heads. Adrian knew that sound. Not the knock every mechanic in the country could hear the knock. It was the ticking underneath, high and thin, almost musical. It lived in a frequency that most ears filtered out as background noise. But Adrian's ears didn't filter. They collected. A cracked primary chain tensioner, hairline fracture internal, invisible from the outside. The crack created a micro-vibration that resonated through the entire engine assembly, producing a knock that mimicked a dozen other failures. Every mechanic who'd touched this engine had chased the knock. Nobody had listened beneath it. Adrian stood there for a long time, 45 seconds maybe, but it felt longer. His feet wanted to keep walking. His brain was doing the math that was a Hell's Angels camp. Those were full-patch members, and he was a skinny black kid from Chicago standing alone in a back lot with no business being anywhere near their iron. but his ears wouldn't let him leave. Harold's voice somewhere in the back of his skull. "Engine don't lie, boy." Adrian shifted his weight, swallowed once, started walking toward the trailer. He didn't know that Earl Stanton was standing in that same cluster, arms crossed, watching the failed start with a look that sat somewhere between boredom and guilt. He didn't know that the next 5 minutes would change both their lives. He just heard a sick engine, and he couldn't walk away from a sick engine. Harold never could either. Adrian was 15 feet away when the first voice hit him. "The hell you looking at, welfare boy?" A patched member with a beard down to his belt buckle turned and squared up, arms wide like he was blocking a doorway. 2 others turned with him, then 3 more. Within 5 seconds, every eye in the Hells Angels camp was on Adrian. He stopped, swallowed, kept his voice level. "Your engine, sir. I can hear what's wrong with it. I can fix it. 3 minutes. I won't charge anything." Silence. 2 full seconds of it. Then laughter. Not chuckles, not snickers. The kind of laughter that comes from the belly and is meant to bury you alive. 20-plus men in leather cuts, chains, and boots laughing at a skinny kid in a stained white t-shirt standing alone on hot asphalt. "You hear that?" A member with a shaved head elbowed the guy next to him. "Little project kid says he can fix the panhead. Somebody check his pockets. Probably already stole a spark plug." "Nah, he's casing the trailers. That's what they do." Earl Stanton stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, Oakley sunglasses perched on his head. He hadn't laughed yet. He was studying Adrian the way a cat studies a mouse it doesn't consider worth killing. Then he stepped forward. "Kid." Earl's voice was flat and slow the way people talk to animals. "I spent 6 months on this engine. I've been building Harleys since before your crackhead daddy walked out on your mama. You think you know something I don't?" Adrian didn't look at Earl. He looked past him at the panhead. "Yes, sir, I do." More laughter, louder this time. Someone threw a crushed beer can. It bounced off the ground near Adrian's feet. He didn't flinch. "Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of," Earl said, "before someone here loses their patience." "Please." Adrian's voice dropped, not weak, steady. "Just let me put my hand on the engine case. 30 seconds. If I'm wrong, I'll leave." "You'll leave now." "I know what every one of those mechanics missed. All 14 of them, including you." That killed the laughter. Earl's jaw tightened, his neck flushed red above the pressed collar of his navy shirt. The tag Heuer on his wrist caught the sunlight as his fists clenched. "What did you just say to me?" "I said they all missed it. Every single one." Adrian's voice stayed flat. "Because they were looking. Nobody listened." A member stepped toward Adrian with his hand raised. Big Ray Thompson moved first, not toward Adrian, but into the path of the other member. 6'5", 310, bald skull shining in the August sun. He didn't say a word, just stood there blocking the swing with his presence alone. Nobody touched Adrian. Vince Iron Jaw Caldwell had been leaning against the trailer the entire time watching, dead cigar in his teeth, arms crossed over his patch-heavy cut. His eyes had moved from Adrian's face to his hands the moment the kid stepped close enough. Oil-black knuckles, nails rimmed with grease that wouldn't wash out, scars across the fingers, old ones, deep ones, the kind you get from slipped wrenches and hot metal. Not soft hands, not student hands, workers' hands, the kind Harold Fletcher had. Vince pushed off the trailer. The crowd went quiet before he opened his mouth. That was how it worked around Vince. Silence preceded him like a shadow. "How old are you?" 19, sir. "Where'd you learn engines?" "My grandfather's garage, South Side Chicago." "Your grandfather fixed panheads?" "He fixed everything." Vince chewed his cigar, studied the kid one more second. 3 minutes. Earl snapped forward. "Vince, you can't be serious. This little—" 3 minutes. Vince didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "We've burned 4 million on men with better shoes and bigger mouths." His eyes moved to Earl, stayed there. 3 minutes won't kill us." Then Vince looked back at Adrian. The cigar shifted from one side of his mouth to the other. "But boy, you make it worse you're not walking out of here the way you walked in." Adrian nodded once. He didn't look at Earl, didn't look at the crowd. He walked straight to the panhead, pulled the John Deere cap tighter on his head, and placed both palms flat on the engine case. Then he closed his eyes. Adrian's palms pressed flat against the engine case. The metal was warm, not hot warm, the kind of warmth the body holds hours after a fever breaks. He didn't move, didn't open his eyes. 30 men stood around him in a half circle, arms crossed, some smirking, some glaring, most waiting for the joke to finish itself so they could go back to their beers. "Start it," Adrian said. Nobody moved. Vince gave a short nod to the prospect standing nearest the handlebars. The kid, barely older than Adrian, reached over and hit the starter. The panhead barked to life. The knock came immediately, deep, metallic, arrhythmic. The same sound that had eaten $4.5 million over 24 months. The same sound that had humiliated 14 mechanics and turned the most legendary bike in the Arizona chapter into a punchline. Adrian kept his eyes closed. His fingertips moved slowly, deliberately across the engine case, like a blind man reading a face. Left hand on the cylinder base, right hand on the primary cover. He tilted his head 5 degrees to the left, then 2 degrees back. He was listening below the knock. Somewhere underneath the deep metallic hammering, buried in a frequency that diagnostic machines rounded off and human ears dismissed, there was a second sound. A ticking. Thin, high-pitched, almost musical. It rose and fell with the RPM, but not in sync with the knock. It had its own rhythm, its own source. Harold's voice in his memory. "Don't chase the loudest sound. That's the liar. Find the quiet one hiding behind it. That's your truth." 15 seconds passed. Adrian's right hand stopped on a spot 3 inches above the primary chain inspection cover. He tapped it with his index finger. Once, twice, 3 times. Each tap precise, measured, like a doctor marking an incision site. He opened his eyes. "Kill it!" The prospect cut the engine. Silence rushed in like water filling a hole. Adrian straightened up. He looked at Vince. Not at Earl, not at the crowd, just Vince. "Your primary chain tensioner is cracked." Earl snorted from behind the group. "The tensioner is fine. I inspected it myself." Adrian still didn't look at him. "It's a hairline fracture. Internal. Runs along the backing plate maybe 2 inches long. You can't see it from the outside. You can't see it with the cover off. You'd have to pull the tensioner completely out and flex it under magnification to find it." "That's the most ridiculous—" Every mechanic who worked on this bike heard the knock. Adrian's voice was calm, flat, like he was reading a weather report. "The knock sounds like a cam lobe, sounds like a rod bearing, sounds like 100 things, so they replaced 100 things. But the knock isn't the problem. The knock is a symptom." He pointed at the spot he'd tapped. "That crack creates a micro-vibration in the tensioner. The vibration travels through the primary chain into the engine cases. The cases amplify it. What you hear as a knock is resonance, the whole engine singing along with a 2-inch crack that nobody thought to look for because nobody listened past the noise." Silence, thick enough to feel. Earl stepped forward. His face was the color of raw steak. A vein in his temple pulsed visibly. "I rebuilt that primary. I inspected every component." "You looked at every component," Adrian said quietly. "You didn't listen to them." The crowd shifted. Nobody was smirking anymore. 20-plus patched members stood still, eyes flicking between the kid and the master mechanic, like spectators at a fight where no one had thrown a punch yet, but someone was about to. "You got a 9/16 wrench and a flathead screwdriver?" Adrian asked. He wasn't asking Earl. He was asking the heir whoever had tools closest. Big Ray moved. The giant reached into a toolbox strapped to the side of a trailer, pulled out both tools and held them toward Adrian without a word. His face showed nothing, but he moved first. Before anyone else could decide whether this kid deserved tools or a beating, Big Ray had already decided. Adrian took the wrench and the screwdriver. 3 minutes, he said, starting now. 90 seconds had passed since he first touched the engine. In that time, he had done what $4.5 million couldn't. He had found the problem. Now he had to fix it. Earl Stanton stood 10 feet away, arms locked across his chest, watching. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles in his cheeks trembled. His entire career, 23 years, the Scottsdale shop, The NASCAR photos, the 6-month waiting list, all of it now balanced on whether a 19-year-old kid in busted sneakers was right or wrong. And somewhere deep in Earl's gut, in a place he would never admit existed, he already knew the answer. The 9/16 wrench fit the primary cover bolts like it was born there. Adrian worked with the kind of silence that made noise feel rude. No grunting, no muttering, no dramatic pauses. Just hands moving with a purpose that every mechanic in that crowd recognized whether they wanted to admit it or not. Bolt 1, 3 turns, out. Set on the trailer bed upright so it wouldn't roll. Bolt 2, 3 turns, out. Placed next to the first, exactly parallel. Bolt 3, same rhythm, same placement. It was the way Harold used to work. Every bolt accounted for, every piece placed where it could be found again without looking. A discipline so deep it was invisible, like breathing. Adrian had watched those hands 1,000 times before they went still. The primary cover came off in one smooth pull. Adrian set it face down on a clean rag he'd pulled from his cargo pocket. Inside the primary chain sat in its housing, oiled, maintained, looking almost new. Earl's work. Say what you wanted about the man, his rebuilds were clean. But clean doesn't mean correct. Adrian reached in with his left hand and found the tensioner by touch. His fingers walked along its length, top to bottom, slow the way you'd run a fingertip along a crack in a window pane to see how deep it goes. He stopped. There. He pulled the tensioner free, held it up so the crowd could see. From the outside, it looked perfect. Machined aluminum smooth finish, no visible damage. The kind of part a $500 an hour mechanic would glance at, clear, and move on. Somebody got a light? A prospect flicked a Zippo. Adrian tilted the tensioner toward the flame, angling it until the firelight caught a hairline running diagonally across the backing plate. 2 inches long. Thin as a strand of hair. Invisible under shop lighting. Invisible under magnification unless you knew exactly where to flex and exactly what to listen for. That's it, Adrian said. That's your $4.5 million. The crowd leaned in. 20-plus men in leather and chains, heads tilted, squinting at a crack they could barely see. A crack that had laughed at 14 mechanics. A crack that had made a mockery of 6-figure invoices, framed certifications, and a pristine shop in Scottsdale with floors cleaner than most kitchens. 2 inches of nothing that had beaten everything. Earl pushed through the group, grabbed the tensioner from Adrian's hand, held it to the light himself, tilted it left, then right. His face went through 4 expressions in 3 seconds. Disbelief, recognition, fury, and something worse. Something that looked like his entire professional identity collapsing inward like a building being demolished floor by floor, the dust rising slow and thick. He set the tensioner down and stepped back without a word. Adrian was already reaching into the right pocket of his cargo pants, the pocket that always bulged. He pulled out a small canvas roll, the kind old-school mechanics use for carrying precision parts, and unrolled it on the trailer bed. Inside were 6 components. Old parts, scavenged, cleaned. Some from swap meets, some from junkyard bins, some traded for labor. Adrian carried them everywhere. Pieces for engines that didn't exist yet, spares for problems he hadn't met. Harold had taught him that too. Always carry what the next engine might need, because the next engine doesn't know you're coming. 3rd component from the left, a tensioner. Same era, same spec. Slight patina from age, but structurally perfect. Adrian had picked it up at a flea market in Joliet 8 months ago for $11. $11. He slid the replacement into place. Fingers guided it home with 0 resistance. A fit so clean it was almost gentle. He tightened the fastener with the flathead. 3/4 turns, firm but not forced. Pulled the chain to check tension. Felt the slack disappear. Nodded once to himself. Primary cover back on. Bolt 1, bolt 2, bolt 3. Same rhythm, same precision, no wasted motion. He stepped back from the panhead, wiped his hands on his cargo pants, leaving 2 fresh oil streaks on the brown fabric. Looked at the prospect near the handlebars. Start it. The prospect looked at Vince. Vince's cigar shifted. He gave the nod. The kid hit the starter. The panhead roared to life. And for the first time in 24 months, the knock was gone. The engine didn't just run clean, it sang. A deep, steady, full-throated rumble that vibrated through the trailer, through the asphalt, through the boots of every man standing in that half-circle. The exhaust pushed warm air in even measured pulses. No sputtering, no choking, no black smoke. Just pure, unbroken combustion. The sound a 1948 panhead was meant to make. The sound it hadn't made since before most of these men were patched in. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The rumble filled the lot. It rolled past the trailers, past the vendor tents, past the Iron Horse Saloon where the cover band had stopped playing because even they could hear something had changed. Bikers on the main strip stopped mid-stride and turned their heads. Some walked closer. Within 60 seconds, the crowd around the Hells Angels camp had doubled, then tripled. People stood on trailer hitches to see overheads. Adrian stood 5 feet from the panhead, wrench in one hand, screwdriver in the other. Faded white tee, brown cargo pants, busted Air Force Ones on cracked asphalt. John Deere cap turned backwards on his head. He didn't smile, didn't celebrate, didn't say a single word. He just listened to the engine breathe. 3 minutes, 2 tools, one $11 part from a flea market in Joliet, 0 charge. Nobody moved for 6 full seconds after the engine settled into its rhythm. 6 seconds doesn't sound like much, but stand in a crowd of 40 people where nobody breathes, nobody shifts their weight, nobody looks at their phone, and 6 seconds feels like a season changing. Earl Stanton broke first, not with words, with motion. He uncrossed his arms slowly like a man lowering a shield he'd carried for decades. His right hand went to his face, pulled the Oakley sunglasses off his head, folded them, put them in his shirt pocket. The shirt with Earl stitched in cursive above the heart. The same shirt he'd worn every day for 6 months while he charged $500 an hour to fail. He turned, walked through the crowd. Nobody stopped him. Nobody said a word to him. He moved between patched members and prospects and hangers-on like a ghost passing through walls, present but no longer solid. His F350 was parked 40 yards away, the one with "Fixed It" on the plates. He drove out of Sturgis without looking back. The custom plates caught the sunlight as he turned onto Junction Avenue, and 3 people who noticed would later tell the story the same way it was the saddest thing they'd ever seen written on a truck. The crowd found its voice in pieces. A murmur first, then low conversations. Then someone near the back, a biker from a Nevada chapter who'd been watching from his own camp, said it loud enough for everyone to hear. 3 minutes! The kid did it in 3 minutes! It spread like fire through dry brush. 3 minutes. Free. A 19-year-old kid. 3 minutes. An $11 part. 3 minutes. $4.5 million. 3 minutes. The words bounced from cluster to cluster across the rally grounds, gaining weight and wonder with every retelling. By sundown, it would reach the main strip. By midnight, every bar in Sturgis would know. By morning, the story would have a life of its own, bigger than the kid, bigger than the bike, bigger than the truth. But for now, in this moment, it was still just a boy and an engine, and a silence that hadn't existed for 2 years. Big Ray Thompson was the first to move toward Adrian. The giant crossed the distance in 4 strides. His shadow fell over Adrian like a building's shadow at noon. 310 pounds, bald head catching the August sun, a face that hadn't shown emotion in public since the last time someone made the mistake of asking about his ex-wife. Big Ray looked at Adrian, looked at the panhead, looked back at Adrian. He nodded. One nod, deep, slow, the kind of nod that takes the place of 100 words between men who understand that words are usually the weakest way to say something. Then he extended his right hand. Not for a handshake, palm up, offering. Adrian placed the wrench and screwdriver in Big Ray's palm. Big Ray put them back in the toolbox, closed the lid, and stepped aside. The exchange lasted 4 seconds. Nobody else in the crowd understood what had just happened, but Adrian did, and Big Ray did. And that was enough. Then Vince moved. The crowd parted before he took his second step. Instinct, habit, survival. When Vince Ironjaw Caldwell walked toward something, you got out of the way first and figured out why later. He stopped 3 feet from Adrian. Chewed cigar still clenched in his teeth, the filter so flat it barely held its shape. His leather cut creaked as he reached up with both hands and untied the bandana from around his neck. Black fabric, faded from years of sweat and desert sun. Embroidered on one corner, barely visible now, was the chapter's founding date. This bandana wasn't merchandise. You couldn't buy it. Couldn't earn it through paperwork or probation. It was given hand to hand, and only to those the chapter recognized as their own. Vince had never given his to anyone outside the club. He stepped forward and tied the bandana around the left handlebar of Adrian's Honda CB350, the primer gray, rust-spotted, vinyl seat-cracked Honda that sat 20 feet away like a stray dog that had wandered into a wolf pack. He tied it tight, double knot, tugged it once to make sure it held. Then he looked at Adrian. The kid's eyes were wet. He blinked once, twice. His jaw worked like he was trying to find words in a language he hadn't learned yet. The John Deere cap sat crooked on his head. His t-shirt had a fresh oil smear across the chest from the tensioner swap. His Air Force Ones were planted on asphalt that was still vibrating from the panhead's idle. "What's your name, son?" "Adrian Fletcher, sir." "Who taught you?" Adrian swallowed. His voice came out quieter than anything he'd said all day. "My grandfather. His name was Harold." Vince nodded, took the cigar out of his mouth for the first time in hours, looked at it, threw it on the ground. "Harold raised a mechanic." He turned and walked back toward the trailer. The crowd swallowed him up. Business resumed, but nothing about that business was the same. The energy in the camp had shifted like a room after someone opens a window that's been painted shut for years. Adrian walked to his Honda, stood next to it, looked at the bandana on the handlebar. Black fabric against primer gray. Something priceless tied to something worthless. He touched it once, just with his fingertips, the way you'd touch something you're afraid might disappear. Somewhere behind him a phone was recording. A shaky vertical video taken from behind a trailer by someone who'd been watching since the first insult. It captured the crack reveal, the start, the silence, the bandana, and the look on a 19-year-old's face when a man who trusted no one decided to trust him. That video would hit the internet in 48 hours. 11 million views in 2 weeks. But Adrian didn't know that yet. He was still standing next to his Honda, one hand on the bandana, listening to the panhead idle 60 feet away. Clean, steady, alive. The way Harold would have wanted it to sound. The video hit YouTube on a Tuesday. By Wednesday afternoon, it had 400,000 views. By Friday, 2 million. By the following Monday, the comment section had turned into a war zone. Mechanics defending their trade, bikers arguing about club protocol, and everyone else just watching a 19-year-old kid in a backwards cap make history with a flathead screwdriver and an $11 part. 11 million views in 14 days. CNN picked it up. Fox ran a segment. 3 podcasts dedicated full episodes. A motorcycle magazine in Japan translated the story and published it with a full-page illustration of the panhead. The calls started on day 3. West Coast Customs, Orange County Choppers, a boutique restoration house in Austin that only worked on pre-1960 Harleys, a collector in Dubai who offered Adrian a blank check to come inspect his fleet, a dealership chain in California that wanted to put his face on a billboard. Adrian said no to all of them. Every single one. His mother answered some of the calls when Adrian was under a car. She'd write the name on a post-it, stick it to the fridge, and Adrian would look at it when he came in for water. He'd read it, nod, peel it off, throw it away. "You sure about this?" she asked once, holding a post-it with a 6-figure number written under a name she couldn't pronounce. "I'm sure, Mama." "That's a lot of money, baby." "Harold's doesn't move." She didn't argue. She'd learned a long time ago that arguing with Adrian about the garage was like arguing with Harold about the garage. The stubbornness was hereditary. So was the certainty. Adrian reopened Harold's the Monday after he got back from Sturgis. Same building, same crooked sign with the missing H. Same oil-black concrete floor. Same single bulb on a wire. Same chalk outlines on the pegboard where every tool had a home. He did one thing different. He took the bandana, Vince's bandana, the one with the chapter's founding date embroidered in the corner, and hung it on a nail above the workbench, right next to a photograph of Harold from 1988. In the photo, Harold was leaning against a Chevy truck thermos in hand, squinting into the sun with a look that was either pride or indigestion. Adrian had never been able to tell. The bandana and the photograph hung side by side, old world and new, proof that the same hands built both. Word traveled fast on the South Side. It always had. But this time it traveled different. Before Sturgis, Adrian's customers were neighbors who paid in cash and casseroles. After Sturgis, the line stretched out the door and down the block. Harleys, Indians, BMWs, a Porsche 911 whose owner drove 45 minutes from Naperville because he'd read a Reddit thread about a kid who could hear engines think. Adrian charged the same rates, fixed what people brought, took what they could afford. Some days the jar by the door was full. Some days it held lint and a prayer. He never turned anyone away. Vince came up twice that first year, rode the panhead from Arizona to Chicago, 18 hours, no trailer. Parked it in front of Harold's like it belonged there, which in some way it did. He and Adrian would sit in the two folding chairs by the garage door, the same chairs Harold and Adrian used to sit in drinking coffee from a thermos that still didn't have a cap. They didn't talk much. Vince wasn't a talker. Adrian wasn't either. They just sat and listened to the South Side sirens, laughter engines, wind the way two people listen to music they both know by heart. On his second visit, Vince brought something. A small wooden box, unfinished, hand-carved. Inside was a set of wrenches, old ones, snap-on 1960s vintage, the kind that don't bend, don't strip, and don't exist in catalogs anymore. "These were my old man's," Vince said. "He was a mechanic, too. Wasn't as good as your grandfather, but he tried." Adrian took the box, set it on the workbench, next to the bandana, next to Harold's photograph. 3 things on a wall in a garage on the South Side of Chicago. A bandana, a photograph, a set of wrenches. Not one of them worth more than a few dollars. Together, they were worth more than $4.5 million. So let me ask you this. What's something you can do that nobody around you takes seriously? Drop it in the comments, because somebody out there is burning millions on a problem you could solve in 3 minutes. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, you already know what to do.
$4.5 million, 14 mechanics, 24 months, and a 19-year-old kid sold it for free because he was the only one who listened. Every expert who thought that Panhead chased what was loud, they replaced what looked broken. They threw money at noise, but Adrian didn't chase the knob. He listened beneath it, and that 2-inch crack nobody found. It was always there, quiet, patient, waiting for the one person who wouldn't mistake volume for truth. The word told Adrian he was nothing. No degree, no certification, no shop with clean floors. But Harold's garage didn't teach credentials. It taught listening, and listening is the one skill no amount of money can replace. So let me ask you this. If the loudest problems in your life are just symptoms, what's the quiet crack underneath that no one's found yet, and whose hands shaped yours, whose voice still guides you long after they've gone silent? Drop your answer in the comments. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.